It happened on a cold autumn afternoon in Maple Creek. A 5-year-old girl with a prosthetic leg was practicing with her crutches when her German shepherd, Rex, suddenly bolted toward an old wooden house nearby. Inside, she discovered an elderly woman tied tightly to a chair, mouth sealed with gray tape, unconscious, and on her lap, a tiny shepherd puppy trembling in fear. What happened next, the brave action this little girl chose to take, would uncover something far greater, a story of kindness, redemption, and the quiet strength of second chances. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Let's see how far one act of compassion can truly go. The late autumn wind drifted softly through Maple Creek, Montana, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint rustle of fallen leaves dancing along the road. The sun hung low behind the ridge, painting the small town in shades of gold and amber. At the quiet playground near her home, a little girl moved slowly along the worn path, the steady click of her crutches marking each careful step. Her name was Emily Carter, 5 years old, slight in build, with messy blonde hair tousled by the wind, and a silver prosthetic leg that glinted softly beneath her beige polka-dot dress. Each motion was deliberate, each pause a small act of courage, as if she were teaching herself that the world could still hold balance and grace, even when life had once taken it away. Beside her, Rex trotted faithfully. The 6-year-old German shepherd was large and sturdy, his coat marked with a black saddle that ran down his back and tan fur along his chest and legs. His amber eyes watched Emily with the vigilance of a soldier, calm yet alert, his movements measured and purposeful. He had once served alongside Jack Carter, Emily's father, during his years in the army, a bond forged through commands, danger, and survival. Now he served in silence, guarding not battlefields, but a little girl's courage. From the porch of their modest wooden house, Jack Carter leaned against the railing, watching them. He was 42, tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark brown hair streaked lightly with silver. His olive-green field jacket and dark gray shirt contrasted with the soft light behind him, and his hands rested in the pockets of his worn blue jeans. There was a calm strength in his face, the kind that comes from both discipline and loss. Every time he looked at his daughter, there was pride, but also the faint ache of what she had already endured. The day was quiet, peaceful in that fleeting way that makes you forget how quickly the world can turn. Then, suddenly, Rex stopped. His head lifted sharply, ears pricked, nose twitching toward something unseen beyond the fence. A low growl rolled from his chest. Emily froze, uncertain. "What is it, Rex?" she whispered. The dog barked once, sharp, commanding, then bolted toward the lane beside their house, his paws kicking up dry leaves. Emily hesitated for just a heartbeat before following, the metal tip of her crutches tapping fast against the path. "Rex, wait!" she cried, but her voice was lost in the wind. The road led to an old wooden house at the end of the lane. It was small and weathered, the paint faded and the shutters slightly crooked, a place people passed by without much notice. Rex reached the porch first, barking furiously, his body rigid with tension. Emily slowed when she saw the door was ajar, swinging slightly with the wind. Her breath caught. From inside came a faint sound, soft, broken, like a muffled cry. Her fingers tightened around the crutch handle. "Mrs. Clara," she called, her small voice trembling. No answer came, only that fragile noise again. She stepped closer, pushing the door open. It creaked, releasing the smell of old wood and cold air. The light filtering through the curtains was dim, just enough to reveal a simple living room. A few framed photos, a knitted blanket, a lamp toppled to one side. Rex stood motionless near the doorway, his growl deepening. And then Emily saw it. At the center of the room sat Clara Johnson, a 70-year-old woman, bound tightly to a chair. Her short, curly gray hair was matted, her beige sweater wrinkled and marked with dust. The long brown skirt she wore brushed against the wooden floor, and her feet hung motionless. Her wrists were tied behind her back with rough rope, her mouth sealed with gray duct tape. Her head had fallen slightly to the side, her eyes closed. For a moment, Emily could only stare, her breath caught in her throat. The world went silent except for the faint sound of the wind through the open door. Then she noticed movement. On Clara's lap lay a small German shepherd puppy, no more than a month old, its fur soft and patchy, trembling against the ropes. It whimpered weakly, pressing itself into the woman's skirt. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She leaned forward, balancing on one crutch, and gently lifted the tiny creature into her arms. The puppy's body was warm, but frail. "It's okay. You're okay now," she whispered, stroking its back. The dog gave a small whine, curling into her chest as if it understood. Rex barked again, this time louder and sharper, turning toward the open door. His tone was urgent, a sound that seemed to cut through everything. Far down the lane, Jack heard it, the unmistakable bark of distress. He froze mid-step on the porch, his instincts from years in the army snapping awake. That wasn't just noise, that was a call. He was running before he even thought, boots thudding against the dirt. When he reached the house, the sight stopped him cold, the door open, his daughter inside. "Emily!" he shouted, his voice low but firm. She turned, her eyes wide, holding the puppy tight against her chest. Jack moved fast, scanning the room, his eyes locking on the bound figure in the chair. "Stay by the door," he ordered softly, his tone steady. He knelt beside Clara, fingers pressed to her neck. A faint pulse. Alive. He drew his pocket knife, the one he always carried, and began cutting through the ropes. The fibers snapped one by one, leaving deep red marks on her skin. "Easy, ma'am," he murmured. "You're safe now." He pulled the tape from her mouth, and Clara let out a shallow, broken sigh. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. "Don't try to speak," Jack said gently. "Help is coming." He took out his phone, calling emergency services, his voice calm and clear as he gave their address. While waiting for the dispatcher, something caught his attention. A piece of paper on the floor beneath the chair. He reached for it, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting was jagged, pressed hard into the paper. "Don't get involved in what's not yours." Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't random. This was a message. The sound of sirens began to rise faintly in the distance. Emily stood by the doorway, her hand still clutching the puppy. Rex remained close beside her, watching everything, ears up, alert. Jack wrapped Clara in a blanket from the floor, keeping her steady until the paramedics arrived. Their boots echoed through the narrow hall as they lifted her carefully onto a stretcher. The flashing red and blue lights spilled through the open doorway, painting the small room in color and motion. As the ambulance pulled away, the street fell quiet once more. Emily clung to the puppy, its small body trembling against her chest. Jack crouched down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, sweetheart," he said softly. "You found her in time." Emily nodded, her lower lip trembling. "She was all alone, Daddy," she whispered. He looked at her, pride and worry mixing in his eyes. "Not anymore," he said. They walked home together beneath the fading light, the first frost beginning to gather on the roofs. Emily held the puppy carefully, its head resting beneath her chin, its breathing slow and steady now. Jack slipped the folded note into his pocket, his mind turning over the words. There was more to this than met the eye, but for now the night had grown quiet again, and his daughter was safe. On the porch, Rex settled beside them, watchful as always. The wind carried the faint sound of sirens fading into the distance, and somewhere inside that silence, a small act of kindness had already begun to change everything. The morning light over Maple Creek broke through a pale layer of fog, settling softly on the quiet hospital that overlooked the valley. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain, the kind that comes after a long, cold night. Jack Carter stood by the window of room 214, his hands resting on the frame as he watched the mist lift. Behind him, the steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room with a rhythmic reminder that life still clung to its fragile balance. On the bed lay Clara Johnson, motionless, her breathing shallow but steady. Her face was pale, her short gray curls slightly damp against the pillow. The nurses said she hadn't stirred since the night before. Emily sat nearby in a small chair, her legs swinging slightly, holding the tiny German Shepherd puppy that had refused to leave her side since that evening. Jack turned from the window and watched his daughter. The little girl was quiet, her blue eyes full of concern, far too old for her age. She stroked the puppy's soft fur, whispering something only it could hear. "She'll wake up soon," Emily said finally, looking up at her father. "I'll give hope back to her when she does." Jack smiled faintly. "Hope?" he asked. Emily nodded. "That's his name now, because he didn't give up." Jack looked at the puppy, a tiny creature of black and tan, fragile but determined, and thought about how fitting that name was. In a room filled with silence and fear, there was something deeply comforting about that small heartbeat pressed against Emily's arm. Outside the door, footsteps echoed down the hall. A man appeared, tall, broad, and sharp-eyed, dressed in a dark brown jacket and a badge clipped to his belt. His name was Owen Hale, a police officer and an old comrade from Jack's army days. Time had weathered him, his once black hair now streaked with gray, his jawline rough with stubble, but his presence still carried the authority of a man used to leading under pressure. He knocked gently before stepping in. "Jack," he said, his voice low but firm. "Heard what happened. You always find trouble, don't you?" Jack gave a half smile. "I stopped chasing it years ago. Now it just finds me." Owen's gaze shifted to the hospital bed, his expression tightening. "How's she holding up?" he asked. "Alive, but shaken," Jack replied. "Doctors say she'll need rest. They found rope burns on her wrists and bruising around the shoulders, like she fought back." Owen nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "This doesn't look like a random break-in. We've been getting whispers about threats like this. Quiet ones, meant to scare folks into silence." Jack frowned. "Silence about what?" Owen hesitated, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "There's a group operating along the northern border," he said. "Calls themselves Black Ridge. Started as smugglers, running illegal whiskey through the back roads. Now it's bigger. Guns, money laundering, intimidation. A few locals tried to talk to the police. Some of them disappeared." The words hung in the air. Jack crossed his arms, the soldier in him waking again. "And you think this connects to Clara?" he asked. Owen met his eyes. "Maybe. She's lived here her whole life, always minded her business. But someone wanted to send her a message." He paused, lowering his voice. "Jack, the note you found. Don't get involved. It's the same wording used in another case 2 counties north. A rancher got it taped to his barn door. A week later, his truck exploded." The room went still. Emily's small hand stopped moving over the puppy's fur. Jack said quietly, "So this isn't just about her." Later that afternoon, they returned to the Johnson house. The police tape fluttered in the wind, yellow against the pale sky. Owen knelt near the porch, examining the dirt where the footprints had been. "There," he said, pointing. Jack crouched beside him, studying the print, a deep tread, military style, with a distinct heel groove. He brushed a bit of mud from it and nodded slowly. "Combat-grade boots," he murmured, "issued to Border Patrol units. The model's been discontinued for years, but I've seen it." Owen raised an eyebrow. "So whoever did this has military ties." Jack straightened, his face hardening. "Or knows how to look like they do." He glanced at the broken doorframe, then at the quiet trees beyond the fence. Someone wanted this to be seen, to feel like a warning. As dusk approached, the 2 men walked along the property line, Rex following close behind. The dog stopped now and then, sniffing the ground, tail stiff. "Still alert," Owen remarked. "He never lost the habit," Jack replied. "Some instincts don't fade." His eyes wandered toward the distant hills where the border road disappeared into the mist. "If Black Ridge is really behind this, they're getting bold. Too bold for a backwoods smuggling ring." Owen nodded grimly. "They've got protection somewhere, local enforcement, maybe someone high up. It's getting harder to tell who's clean." That night, Jack drove back to the hospital. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch in Clara's room, her crutches leaning against the wall, the puppy curled beside her. The only sound was the soft hum of the machines and the whisper of rain against the window. Jack sat quietly for a while, staring at the sleeping figures. His daughter, her small body folded protectively around the dog, the old woman fighting silently to come back. He thought of Owen's words, the footprint, the warning. Trouble was coming, and this time it felt closer to home than ever. Just before dawn, Clara stirred. Her breathing changed, quicker, uneven, and her eyes opened slowly, filled with confusion. Jack stood and moved closer, his voice calm. "Easy, ma'am. You're in the hospital. You're safe now." She blinked, trying to focus, her lips trembling. They tied me," she whispered hoarsely. Tears welled in her eyes. They thought I'd tell. I tried to warn my son, but he wouldn't listen. Jack leaned forward gently. Your son? She nodded weakly. Ethan, my boy. He got mixed up with them. I just wanted him out. They said if I talked, they'd... Her voice broke. Jack took her hand, his grip steady. You did the right thing, he said softly. You're safe now. We'll figure this out. Clara's tears fell silently. He's not a bad man, she murmured. He just made the wrong friends. Please don't let them hurt him. Jack nodded, his voice low. I won't. As she drifted back into exhausted sleep, he stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing deep. Outside the window, the morning light returned to Maple Creek, soft, cold, indifferent to the human lives it touched. He stepped into the hallway where Owen waited. She talked? Owen asked quietly. Jack nodded. About her son, Ethan. Says he's involved with them. Owen exhaled. That complicates things. Jack looked down the long corridor, his jaw tightening. No, he said finally. It just makes it personal. Snow had begun to fall again over the Montana borderlands, soft at first, like dust settling over secrets long buried. The roads were narrow and quiet, the air thin and sharp, every sound swallowed by white. Jack Carter drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the endless stretch of gray ahead. Beside him sat Owen Hale, flipping through a worn field notebook, his brow furrowed with thought. In the back seat, Rex stood alert, his amber eyes following every movement outside the window. The old army truck rattled faintly as it climbed toward the ridge road, its headlights cutting through the fog. They were headed toward Silver Elk Tavern, a place whispered about more than spoken of, a roadside bar near the border where the Black Ridge Syndicate was said to meet under cover of night. The drive stretched long and tense. The two men didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Years of service had taught them the kind of silence that carries understanding. Owen finally broke it, his voice rough. This place isn't just a bar. Locals say trucks go in full and come out empty. No one asks questions. Jack nodded, eyes still forward. And no one talks about the ones who ask. Rex shifted slightly, nose pressing against the window, a low growl building in his chest. Jack reached back and rested a hand on his head. Easy, boy. We're not there yet. The wind picked up outside, the snow turning from a drift to a curtain. When they finally reached the valley, Silver Elk sat at the edge of the highway, like a ghost from another time. Its sign hung crooked, half the letters missing, the paint chipped from years of weather. Dim yellow light glowed through the frost-covered windows. 2 trucks were parked out front, both unmarked, both too clean for the kind of place that served cheap whiskey. The men stepped out into the cold, their boots sinking into snow that muffled even the sound of breath. Jack adjusted his olive field jacket, the cold biting through the fabric. Stay close, he muttered. Owen nodded, his hand brushing against the holster on his belt. Inside, the tavern was dim, heavy with the smell of old liquor and wood smoke. A handful of men sat scattered across the room, speaking in low tones. At the bar, a woman in her 50s wiped down glasses without looking up. Her eyes flickered toward them once, sharp, assessing, then away again. Jack and Owen took a table near the corner. They didn't need to announce why they were there. Their presence spoke loud enough. From behind the counter, the woman finally said, "You're a long way from town," Jack replied evenly. "Just passing through." Her lips tightened. No one passes through Silver Elk without a reason. They stayed for less than an hour, observing. One by one, men slipped into the back hallway, each time returning lighter, quieter, like they'd just been paid or warned. Owen leaned closer, whispering, "This place is the front. The real work's done behind that door." Jack's gaze followed the last man out. "And whatever they're moving, it's not whiskey." When they left, the wind had grown harsher, and the snow fell heavier, covering the tire tracks in seconds. As they walked toward the truck, Rex's head shot up. He sniffed the air, then darted toward the edge of the lot, barking sharply. Jack followed, flashlight cutting through the white haze. Half buried in the snow lay something small and dark. Jack knelt and brushed away the frost. It was a leather wallet, soaked and frozen stiff. Inside were a few old bills, a photograph of a younger man in uniform, and an ID card, its edges frayed but still legible. Ethan Johnson, U.S. Army. Jack's heart clenched. He looked to Owen, who had stepped closer. "Clara's son," Jack said quietly. "He was here." Under the ID, folded once and stained with moisture, was a torn scrap of paper. Scrawled across it, almost illegible, were the words, 12 a.m., Silver Elk. Owen exhaled, the cold clouding his breath. "That's tonight." Jack tucked the note into his jacket. "Then he's still close." For a long moment they stood in silence, the snow falling heavier around them, the world shrinking into white. Rex sniffed the ground again, growling softly before glancing up at Jack as if to say, "We're not done here." Jack gave a small nod. "Good boy. We'll find him." The thought that Ethan might not be a perpetrator, but a man trying to break free from something bigger, burned quietly in his chest. Back in town, the news of what they'd found spread quietly. Jack didn't tell Clara everything, just enough to keep her calm. She had recovered faster than anyone expected and insisted on returning home to rest, though she still moved slowly, wrapped in a thick beige shawl and carrying the gentleness of someone who had seen both fear and forgiveness. She was recovering well, her voice stronger, though her eyes still carried the exhaustion of fear. Sitting by her window with a blanket draped across her lap, she said softly, "He's out there, isn't he?" Jack nodded gently. "Yes, and I think he's trying to do the right thing." She turned her gaze to the snow outside, her hands trembling slightly. "He used to say that once you cross a line, it's hard to find your way back. Maybe he's trying to prove himself wrong." Jack's expression softened. "Maybe he already has." Emily came to visit every afternoon, always bringing hope. The little puppy now livelier, its steps still clumsy but full of energy. Clara insisted that the dog stay with Emily for now. "He seems happy with her," she said with a faint smile. "Besides, she's earned a bit of joy." Emily took the task seriously, teaching Hope to sit, to follow simple commands, always under Rex's patient supervision. The two dogs were often seen in the yard together, the older shepherd watchful, the young one playful and trusting. Sometimes Emily would sit by the fire and draw, her small hands tracing the image of Rex barking at the old wooden house, the night everything began. Days later, Jack and Owen returned to the ridge. The snow had not let up, covering the land in silence. Near the back of the tavern, they found fresh tire tracks leading into the forest, deep, heavy, and too consistent to be local traffic. Following them on foot, they reached a clearing where several crates lay stacked under a tarp marked Maple Spirits Co. Owen tore one open with his knife. Inside were liquor bottles filled not with whiskey, but a pale, oily fluid that smelled of fuel. "Gasoline blend," he muttered. "They're running more than alcohol. They're moving smuggled chemicals." Jack said nothing, his breath fogging in the cold air. The pattern was clear. Black Ridge had expanded far beyond bootlegging. By the time they returned to the truck, the sky had turned violet, and the wind carried the promise of another storm. Jack looked once more at the note in his hand. 12 a.m. Silver Elk. The time was close now. He could feel it, the uneasy pull between duty and compassion, between the law and the truth. Somewhere out there, Clara's son was walking that same fragile line, caught between fear and redemption. And in that quiet stretch of Montana snow, Jack Carter knew that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought in war, but in the silence that followed. The storm had rolled in fast over Maple Creek, swallowing the small town in white. Wind pressed hard against the windows of Jack Carter's house, carrying the hiss of sleet through the pines. Inside, the fireplace burned low, casting an amber glow across the living room where Jack sat with Owen Hale, his old Army friend turned local officer, who had stopped by that evening for coffee and quiet company. They didn't speak much. It was the kind of silence forged from years of shared service, steady and unspoken. Rex lay curled on the rug near the fire, tail twitching in restless dreams, until suddenly his head shot up, ears rigid, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Jack froze. "What is it, boy?" The German shepherd stood, gaze locked toward the frosted window. A dull orange flicker glowed faintly through the swirling snow outside. Too steady to be lightning, too alive to be harmless. Jack's voice dropped. "That's Clara's place." Rex barked sharply and lunged toward the door. Jack grabbed his olive field jacket from the hook. "Owen, get your keys." They ran out into the storm, snow stinging their faces. Owen's patrol truck sat parked under the pine tree, half buried in white. The two men climbed in, Rex leaping into the back seat before the doors could shut. Owen turned the ignition. The engine roared against the cold as blue lights cut through the blizzard. Tires spun, then caught traction, throwing slush behind them as they tore down the narrow lane. Ahead, the dark outline of Clara Johnson's wooden house glowed orange, the flames climbing higher with each passing second. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. Clara Johnson's small wooden home was half engulfed, flames tearing through the roof, the wind feeding the inferno. Smoke twisted upward in choking columns, glowing orange against the black sky. The storm raged around it, snow hissing as it melted on contact with the heat. "Backside first," Owen shouted, covering his face with his sleeve. Jack could barely hear him through the roar. They rounded the house, and that's when they saw him. A figure near the basement steps, half crouched, struggling to drag someone up from the darkness. It was Ethan Johnson. His clothes were torn, covered in soot and blood. His face was streaked with ash, eyes wild but desperate. "Help me!" he shouted hoarsely over the crackling. "She's down here. I can't lift her." Jack lunged forward, gripping the burning railing, and peered down. Clara lay at the base of the steps, her wrists bound again, her frail body limp. Ethan coughed hard, the smoke choking his words. "They came back. They said if I didn't erase it all, they'd kill her. I couldn't." Another explosion from inside the house cut him off, the blast of heat forcing all three men back. Owen rushed to the truck to grab the fire blanket, while Jack and Rex pressed closer to the basement door. "Rex, go!" Jack shouted. The German shepherd leapt down into the basement without hesitation, the glow of fire reflecting off his coat. Within seconds, the dog found Clara, tugging at the ropes around her wrists, teeth working fast. Jack climbed down right behind him, ignoring the heat biting into his skin. He caught her under the shoulders, lifting her up while Rex dragged at the knots. The air was thick, suffocating, the sound of cracking beams above them like gunfire. When the last rope snapped, Clara's body slumped forward into Jack's arms. "Take her!" Ethan cried, stumbling at the top of the steps. His hands shook as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small silver USB drive. He threw it toward Jack, the flash catching the firelight. "Everything's in there," he shouted. "All of it. Names, routes, the officers who cover for them. And this." Jack caught the drive and looked up at him through the smoke. "Come with us," he yelled back. Ethan shook his head, coughing violently. "There's no time." The house groaned, the floorboards splitting apart. Owen reappeared just as Jack climbed out with Clara in his arms. "She's breathing," Jack panted. "Get her to the car." Owen covered her with the fire blanket and carried her through the snow toward the truck. Jack turned back. The flames had spread through the roof now, roaring like a beast. Ethan was still inside. "Ethan!" Jack shouted, moving forward. But the moment he did, part of the roof collapsed, blocking the doorway. The impact sent sparks and debris shooting into the air. Through the blaze, Jack caught one last glimpse. Ethan standing near the window, his face lit in orange, eyes fixed on his mother. Then the light swallowed him whole. The sound of wood giving way echoed through the forest. Jack staggered back as the roof fell inward, sparks raining down around him. Rex barked furiously at the flames, pacing, refusing to leave. "Come on, boy!" Jack shouted, grabbing his collar. The dog hesitated, whining low, but obeyed. Together they retreated into the snow, the heat burning against their backs even from 50 feet away. The wind carried the fire's roar through the trees, and for a long moment none of them spoke. Only the crackle of the collapsing house filled the silence. When the firefighters arrived, there was nothing left to save. The storm had slowed the response, and the blaze had done its work. Clara sat wrapped in a blanket in Owen's patrol car, trembling but conscious, her tear-streaked face reflecting the orange glow in the distance. "My boy," she whispered brokenly. Jack knelt beside her, the USB clutched in his gloved hand. He said nothing at first, only placed a hand over hers. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Did he?" Her voice faltered. Jack swallowed hard. "He made sure you lived," he said softly. Later, when the fire had burned itself to silence, Jack stood near the ashes with Rex at his side. The night was nearly still now, the wind having spent its rage. Snow fell again, soft and steady, covering the remains like a shroud. Owen approached quietly, his breath fogging the air. "We'll analyze what's in that drive," he said. "If it's what you think it is, this whole thing ends tonight." Jack nodded, staring at the blackened ruin before him. "He paid the price for telling the truth," he murmured. "Let's make sure it counts." At dawn, the flames were gone. The ashes smoldered faintly under the new snow. Jack watched the light rise over the trees, the silver USB still warm in his pocket. Behind him, Clara sat quietly in the truck, eyes closed, whispering prayers only she could hear. "He lost his way," she said softly when Jack returned. "But at the end, he found it again." Jack looked back once more at the smoke curling into the pale sky. "He did the right thing," he answered, voice barely above a whisper. The fire had long gone cold by the time justice began to move. Snow had melted into slush along the edge of Maple Creek, leaving behind streaks of gray where the flames had once touched the sky. In the quiet office of the county station, Owen Hale sat beneath the dim yellow light, the silver USB resting on his desk like a relic of confession. Jack stood across from him, his hands shoved deep in his field jacket pockets, watching as Owen slid the drive into the computer. The screen flickered, revealing rows of coded files, numbers, faces, and roots, the kind of truth that could topple men who thought they were untouchable. Owen didn't say much. He just nodded once and muttered, "We've got them." Outside, the wind softened, carrying with it the faint promise of an ending. Within 48 hours, the investigation that had haunted the state for years began to unravel. The FBI arrived before dawn, headlights sweeping across the frozen parking lot of the Silver Elk Tavern. Jack stood beside Owen as unmarked vehicles rolled in, men and women in dark coats stepping into the pale light. Rex waited quietly near the truck, his breath fogging the air, every muscle alert but calm. The operation moved with precision, a slow tightening of the noose that had once strangled border towns like theirs. When the doors were broken open and the smugglers led out in cuffs, Owen didn't cheer. He simply looked down at the snow, his voice low. "He gave his life to make this happen." Jack glanced at him. "Then we make sure it wasn't wasted." By mid-morning, news spread across Montana. Radios buzzed in diners and gas stations. Televisions replayed the same headline. "Veteran and K-9 dog help uncover major smuggling ring. FBI credits local cooperation." Reporters crowded outside the sheriff's office, eager for a quote, but Jack had no taste for the spotlight. He stood on the steps, hands in his pockets, when a young journalist asked, "Sir, how does it feel to be called a hero?" Jack gave a faint smile, his eyes drifting toward the end of the street where the Carter home stood quiet under the morning sun. "The real heroes," he said softly, "are the little girl and the dog who never stopped believing someone needed help." Later that week, Maple Creek returned to a fragile peace. The air no longer carried smoke, only the smell of wet pine and thawing ground. Clara Johnson was home again, though her steps were slower now, her face paler than before. She sat by the window where she used to feed birds, a beige shawl wrapped around her shoulders. When Jack and Emily visited, the old woman's eyes welled up the moment she saw the small shepherd puppy in Emily's arms. "Hope," Emily said proudly, setting the pup on Clara's lap. The dog was bigger now, his coat fuller, his eyes bright with the kind of innocence that hadn't yet learned loss. Clara's trembling hands brushed through his fur. "I lost my son," she whispered, her voice breaking into a fragile smile. "But it seems the Lord sent another soul to stay with me." For Emily, the days that followed carried a new kind of light. The fear that once shadowed her had softened into courage. She practiced walking every morning at the edge of the yard, her silver crutches steady, the prosthetic leg glinting beneath her dress as Rex and Hope watched from the porch. Sometimes she'd stop midway, petting Rex and whispering, "You started it all, didn't you?" The big dog would lean against her side as if answering yes. Jack often watched from the window, coffee in hand, his heart heavy with pride. For the first time in years, the world around them felt gentle again. On Sunday, Owen stopped by the Carter home, a rare warmth in his expression. "FBI wrapped the last of it," he said, standing in the doorway, snow melting from his boots. "Malone's men, the border officers, all of them. The case is closed," Jack nodded slowly. "And Ethan?" Owen hesitated, then replied, "Buried near the ridge next to the chapel." His mother wanted him close. There was silence for a while, not uncomfortable, just filled with understanding. Then Owen looked down at Rex, who sat by the hearth. "You ever think he knows what he's done?" Jack smiled faintly. "He doesn't need to. He just knows it mattered." That evening, Clara invited them all for supper. A small gesture, but one she called Thanksgiving in March. The house had been rebuilt in part, though the scent of fresh lumber still mingled with that of cinnamon bread. Emily helped set the table while Hope trotted between her legs. Rex lay by the door, guarding quietly as he always did. When they sat down, Clara took a deep breath. "For the ones we lost," she said, her eyes shining, "and the ones who found their way back." No one spoke for a while, but the silence itself was peaceful, the kind that wraps around grief until it turns into gratitude. As spring came to Maple Creek, the snow began to retreat from the fields, revealing soft grass and forgotten footprints. Emily could walk farther now without her crutches, though Rex still paced beside her like a shadow. One afternoon, as Jack tightened the straps on her leg brace, she looked up at him and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to save dogs that don't have a home, like Rex saved Mrs. Clara." Jack chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sweetheart, I think you already started." Her smile was small but steady, the kind that promised more than words ever could. The seasons turned with quiet grace. The wounds of Maple Creek, the fear, the fire, the secrets, healed beneath the rhythm of ordinary days. The people spoke of Ethan Johnson's sacrifice in hushed tones, not as gossip but as remembrance. Some said redemption came too late, others said it came right when it was meant to. Jack didn't argue either way. He just knew the world had been changed by small hands and loyal hearts. One golden afternoon, when the leaves began to fall again, Jack walked down the winding road with Emily, Rex, and Hope. The air was crisp, the trees painted in amber and rust, their footsteps soft on the blanket of leaves. Emily reached out, holding her father's hand as Rex trotted ahead, and Hope bounded after a gust of wind. The sky stretched wide and forgiving, as if the town itself had exhaled after a long winter. Jack looked down at his daughter, her smile bright against the fading light, and thought, maybe this was what second chances truly looked like. In the quiet town of Maple Creek, every act of kindness, no matter how small, became a light that broke through the cold. This story reminds us that true heroism often hides in the simplest gestures: a child's compassion, a soldier's promise, a loyal dog's bark in the dark. The greatest strength isn't found in glory or recognition, but in the hearts of those who choose to care when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us what you felt in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so together we can keep spreading stories of faith, courage, and silent sacrifice. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace and compassion wherever you are.